So these are slides taken out of chapter 1. So the first thing is, what do microbes do for us? So the first thing I wanted you to do was to try to start thinking about where microorganisms are in the environment and what they do. So one of the big things to remember is that microorganisms are, wait a minute, I'm trying to get the pen to write. Microorganisms are, they're ubiquitous. So basically what that means is they're everywhere. So microorganisms, they're on your skin, they're in your body, they're on everything that you touch pretty much. So microorganisms are everywhere. They do lots of things for us, so they can be found in our food. Okay, so things like yogurt, beer, wine, bread, cheese, sauerkraut, all of those things have microorganisms in them, and those microorganisms are what gives them their unique property. They're in the forest, okay, so they decompose. Without microorganisms, we'd have leaves and dead things built up. They would never go away. Other things that we have, so one thing we talked about was the microbiome, and I'll post a link to some things about the microbiome. So the microbiome is the collective group of organisms that are found in and on our body, and each person has a distinct microbiome. Okay, so they're everywhere, and even though we're taking this class and you're going to be a nurse and you're thinking that microorganisms are bad because they cause disease, there are a lot of good microorganisms. Okay, so they do both good things and bad things. Okay, so why do we use them? Why are they useful to us as humans? So one of the things besides foods is that we use bacteria, for example, for research use. So they're very good for this because they're very small. Okay, so you don't need a lot of room to grow a lot of bacteria, and their structure is very simple. Okay, so they're super, super simple. So they're not complex like a human or like a dog or a cat. They're very simple, so there's just one cell. It's really, really easy to grow a large population, so a lot of bacteria, really fast. Okay, so you can grow them super fast. Okay, so an example of this is E. coli. So E. coli is a bacterium that we'll talk about, and it's used as a model organism a lot. So because it's very small, it's very simple, and it actually doubles every 20 minutes. So it doubles every 20 minutes. So in one day, you could grow enough bacteria to do like a really big experiment. You could get millions and millions of bacteria. So they grow super, super fast. Okay, we use bacteria to make vaccines. We use fungi to make antibiotics, and we'll talk more about that as time goes on. Another thing that's unique about microorganisms is that they're extremely diverse. Okay, so humans, animals, we're all pretty similar in how we get our food and how we use nutrients. Bacteria, they're super duper diverse. Okay, so they don't all go through cellular respiration the same way. They can be found all over the place, right? So you could find them in the Arctic, in frozen situations. You could find them in the hot springs in Yellowstone, in really hot places. You could find them in the like the Dead Sea, which is super salty. Okay, so bacteria have developed lots of unique biochemical pathways that allow them to survive in really unique environments, and that leads to a lot of diversity. So you can find out different things by comparing something that might be found in a human body compared to something that's found maybe in the Arctic. Okay, now types of microbes. Okay, so when we're talking about microbes, really what we're talking about is anything that is really, really small and hard to see. Okay, so we're gonna talk about prokaryotes. Okay, so prokaryotes are these. Pro is technically it's before the nucleus. So these cells or these organisms don't have a nucleus. Okay, so prokaryotes are really, really, really simple. Okay, eukaryotes, right? Eukaryotes are what humans are, okay, or your dog or your cat or a plant. So they all have a nucleus. So the U is like true, so a true nucleus. Okay, so pro, we're going to be very, very simple. Okay, now, the prokaryotes are divided into two domains, and sometimes they call them a super kingdom. Okay, so the two domains, so one is just plain bacteria, and sometimes they say eubacteria or true bacteria. Okay, so just plain bacteria. So those are the pathogens. These are the things that you guys are familiar with. So like this is E. coli. Okay, so maybe staph, strep. Okay, so things you've heard of before. Those are true bacteria. Okay, now someone that studies bacteria, they're just a bacteriologist. Okay, so it's the science of bacteriology. Okay, now the other group of prokaryotes, okay, so number 2, so this would be like 1 and this would be 2. These are the archaea. And these are really, really different than the ones that are found in the human body. So these are things that they're called environmental extremophiles, which if you look at this word, you guys know that phile means like loving and extreme. So these things love extreme conditions. So environmental extremophiles live in very extreme conditions. So places like I just mentioned, so Yellowstone, in the hot springs, they could in the ocean, in the deep bottom of the ocean. They could live in ice. They could live in high salt. So they live in really different places. And what's special about them is that they have novel or very different biochemical pathways. So they're totally different. And those actually end up being useful to us, and we can talk about that more as time goes on. Okay, now, some microbes are eukaryotic, so let's talk about those. Okay, so algae are, they are photosynthetic. They're kind of in between. Sometimes they're considered protozoa and sometimes they're considered plants, but they're photosynthetic, so that means they can make energy from the sun. They're found in water, and they can be of big importance to us. So they are using algae to make biofuels. Okay, so they're using them as instead of using like petroleum products. Right now, there's a big problem in Florida with, they're calling it red tides. Okay, so the algae off the coast of Florida are they produce a toxin, and the toxin can make people sick. So algae are, they're extremely diverse. They're very different, and they can cause problems, but they can also be used for good. Okay, the study of algae is phycology, so it's kind of a different word. Okay, now fungi. Fungi are some of my favorite things. So fungi they're mainly known as decomposers. They can be a single cell, like yeast, or they could be multicellular, like maybe a mushroom. Okay, so mushrooms. So if you think about what's in your refrigerator when things get old, what you find is fungi are typically fuzzy. Okay, so fungi are fuzzy, where bacteria are more likely to be slimy. Okay, so fuzzy fungi. This is a picture of, this is actually penicillium. And this is what it looks like if you looked at it really, obviously really, really close with the microscope. So these little things, and this is probably scanning electron microscope or micrograph. These little things are spores. And that's what gives rise to another, that's kind of almost like a seed. So this is where penicillin comes from. Okay, the science of mycology is the study of fungi. Okay, now virology. Viruses are in their own group, and most of the time people consider them they are acellular. Okay, so acellular means they don't have a cell, so they're not a cell. So they don't have a cell membrane, they don't have a cell wall. They are only made out of protein and a nucleic acid. Okay, so protein and nucleic acid, that's it. There's no organelles, there's no cell membranes. That's all it is protein, nucleic acid. They could either have DNA or they can have RNA. Okay, this picture is an example of a phage. Okay, so a phage is just a type of a virus, and this is pretty like a classic virus picture. This is the protein. Okay, and then inside of here, this is where the DNA will be, and then this will attach to a cell. Okay, so a virus has to have a host cell in order to reproduce, so it can't survive without it. Okay, so it can't do anything without, or can't replicate, it can't continue to grow without a host. Okay, now there are some organisms that are even smaller than a virus. Okay, so there's a thing called a viroid. A viroid is infectious DNA. So it doesn't even have protein with it. A viroid, usually they only infect plants, and there aren't that many of them. Okay, now the other thing is these are prions. Some people pronounce it prions. Okay, this is an infectious protein. Okay, and these are really nasty organisms. They're really, really hard to kill. They're almost impossible to get rid of. They infect the nervous system of animals. Okay, so one example of a prion infection is mad cow disease. So mad cow, we'll talk about prions more in the virus chapter, but you get mad cow from eating meat that's infected with mad cow, and then the prion, this protein, can influence your nervous system, and it just causes all sorts of problems. So we'll talk about, there's a whole chapter on viruses that we'll talk about. Okay, more eukaryotic parasites. Okay, so we have protozoa. Okay, so they are single-celled animals. They can be pathogenic. So this is amoeba. There are some amoeba that can infect your brain. There are some that can cause diarrhea. There are some that are harmless. Okay, protozoology is the study of protozoa. Helminths are worms. Okay, so worms fall into microbes because they have microscopic life stages, so they can be itty bitty teeny tiny, and so you have to use a microscope to diagnose them. I have this science spelled wrong here. Okay, so parasitology is the study of worms or parasites, and this is a picture of a worm, and this just shows some of the parts that will attach to your intestines. Ugh. Okay, now arthropods. Arthropods are insects. Okay, and insects are important in microbiology because that's how we can transmit disease or move things around. And I know if you guys think about it, you can come up with some examples of diseases that are transmitted by insects. So things like malaria and mosquitoes, or let's see, Lyme's disease and ticks, Zika. I mean, you can think of a lot of examples. Okay, now I'm going to stop here because this is a good cutoff point, and then that video won't be that long, and then we'll pick up at this point.